Disney's The Princess and the Frog starts like many other Disney films, with a prologue that gives us information about the main character or something that they are going to be dealing with. The Princess and the Frog's prologue introduces us to Tiana's father, James, and though he might be dead by the time the actual movie begins, he still winds up playing one of the most influential roles in Tiana's life. He worked hard to provide what he could for his family and those around him. He's the one who inspired Tiana to cook and to dream about one day owning a restaurant in her family's name. Throughout the movie, even though he's not around, he had a lasting impression on his daughter, and he almost acts as a sort of guide, leading Tiana towards her dream and keeping her on the right path. It's safe to conclude that James taught his daughter everything she knows about being hardworking and holding on to her dreams. Now, there wasn't much information surrounding what happened to James, though we do see a medal alongside a picture of him in his military uniform, implying that he died in service of his country during World War I. And if you take a closer look at the medal, you will notice that it is what they call a DSC, or a Distinguished Service Cross. And it's actually the US military's second highest medal or decoration that the military can give to soldiers that perform extraordinary acts of heroism in combat with the enemy. Meaning that in the military, James was recognized as an extremely brave individual, and he likely died saving a lot of his fellow soldiers. That's really as much as we can conclude about Tiana's father from the subtle clues spread throughout the prologue and rest of Tiana's adventure. And the movie would have us believe that James has been dead since the beginning of the film. However, there is actually a theory floating around that claims that Tiana's father might not have died in the war, and instead makes his appearance throughout the movie as Dr. Facilier, the Shadow Man, the antagonist of the movie. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so be sure to watch until the end to hear our own analysis of the theory and if we really think it holds up to what it claims. Alright, so this theory is a bit odd, but when you hear why the theorist has come to that conclusion, it kind of makes sense, and I can totally see how some people would believe it. The short version of the theory is that James, Tiana's father, is Dr. Facilier. Basically, the theory is based on the idea that James didn't die during the war, and even if he did, he was actually able to come back, and in kind of a creepy way too. You see, back during World War I, there were so many casualties on the battlefield that it would have been near impossible for them to identify even half of the people who died. That means that there were quite a few cases where soldiers would go missing, or something of that sort, and after some time, they would just be presumed as being lost to war. It happened all of the time. So who's to say if James really died at all? And even if he did happen to die, as Tiana believes, the theory also talks about how he still could have turned out to be Dr. Facilier. You see, either way, dead or alive, in order for him to have become the man we know as Dr. Facilier, James would have had to have a run-in with the voodoo spirits, which, as most know, is a very common cultural theme in New Orleans. And this is when he would have made a deal with them to be allowed to return back to his home. The theory then follows that the voodoo spirits accepted the deal. But, as is often the case with dark magic, there was a dark twist. So, the spirits brought him back alright, but instead of looking like he used to, James was now a skeletal-looking, gaunt-faced man. When he struggled to get back on his feet, he would end up making another deal with the voodoo spirits in exchange for a small number of magic powers, just so that he could get by. Originally, it is theorized that he wanted the powers to help his family achieve their dreams. However, along the way, his mind ended up getting warped, and he had forgotten his original goal, succumbing to the darkness that had granted him the powers in the first place. And the more and more tricks that he played on the innocent people of New Orleans, the more it just darkened his heart until it was practically non-existent. And, much like debt in real life, the debt that he had racked up with the voodoo spirits would only increase more and more as time went on, causing him to target the prince in the first place. Okay, that was the theory in short. And again, when first stumbling upon the theory, it was hard to believe. Yeah, it could have happened, but was it likely just based off of that? Probably not. However, when you take a look at the facts surrounding Dr. Facilier and his behavior towards Tiana, in addition to a couple of other small snippets throughout the movie, it actually makes this theory seem more plausible. For instance, think about the scenes with Dr. Facilier toward the end of the film. As his ever-encroaching demise gets closer and closer, he grows desperate and tries to strike up a deal with Tiana, someone who he hadn't met before, at least not as Dr. Facilier. It is clear that the two have never met before because when Tiana realizes who he is, she refers to him as as the Shadow Man, as if she had heard rumors about his ill doings but had never crossed him herself, at least not enough to be familiar with him. But he's certainly familiar with her. In fact, he seems to know a lot of things about Tiana for someone who he has supposedly never met. He not only knows her name, but even goes as far as to try to tempt her with her dream on a silver platter. He offers her a restaurant of her very own, and all she would have to do is give him the talisman that connects him to the spirits. And this begs the question, how did he know that she wanted a restaurant so badly in the first place? And so much so that he knew that he might be able to tempt her with the offer of one? Not to mention the tone that he talks to her in. Like when Dr. Facilier is speaking with Tiana, he seems to act a lot more personal than he did when we saw him interacting with Lawrence, or even when he was talking to Naveen. He seemed almost human when he was talking to her. Like there was a lot more to their history than we were ever led to believe. It is possible that he somehow found out that she was accompanying Naveen once his spell took effect. But that still doesn't really explain how he knows Tiana by name, or even the fact that her biggest dream was to own her own restaurant. Overall, it just seems like he knew her more than she knew him. However, despite all of this, like most Disney theories, you need to take this one with a grain of salt. And at the end of the day, know that for the most part, it is just a theory. Also, like a lot of theories out there is a lot of it that is up for discussion or debate. We need to break down a few things that the theory got right, and then a few things that it might have gotten wrong. For instance, one of the things that this theory is loosely based on is the idea that the character designs for James and Facilier are similar, though the latter is clearly a lot more skeletal looking. The theory supports this slight difference by saying that many believe that Facilier was so bony because he had either been resurrected or somehow magically kept alive. But medically speaking, he had been dead for a long time, and that would be possible due to the fact that we mentioned before. It is believed that Tiana's father died in the war, making his death one of the more open-ended ones in Disney. And we know there are a lot of theories about various Disney characters who have supposedly died, but were not really dead. And admittedly, this one seems to be a bit more plausible than the others, solely because, historically speaking, there have been false death reports during wartime before, so it certainly could have happened. However, that is basically the extent of supporting facts for the theory. In terms of things that seem to contradict the idea, there are a lot of them. First, let's just go off the characters themselves. Beyond the very minor similarities in their character design, and I do mean minor, there isn't much else that the two seem to have in common. I mean, as we mentioned before, James was awarded the DSC, which is the second highest medal of honor someone can receive for committing an act of heroism during wartime, meaning that he was a courageous man who laid his life on the line in order to save others. And considering it was during World War I, that's even more impressive. Before that time, there had never been a more dangerous war, or one of that scale. So to have died in the service of his country while also likely protecting his men in the process means that he was just straight up amazing, at least in the eyes of the military, and of course his daughter. Facilier, on the other hand, came off as a bit of a coward, didn't he? I guess anyone in their right mind would be afraid of evil voodoo spirits, but his whole vibe just didn't scream decorated war hero to me. At the beginning of the film, James is shown as respectful, charismatic, and as someone who cherishes his community and the people around him. On the other hand, Facilier was clearly only looking out for himself, and in the end, he didn't seem to like people too much. Yeah, one could argue that anyone could go to the dark side if they were desperate enough, even maybe out of obligation to their family if they believed that the dark side could protect their family or something. But it just didn't seem like something that the charismatic James we met at the beginning of the film would do. And regarding the fact that the only person who Facilier treats like a human being is Tiana, it probably most likely is because he wants her to give him the talisman back. Other than that, these are just the things that contradict the theory based on the character. If we are going off history and facts, I think we should take a look at the concept of royalty and what Facilier said at one point in the film. Do you remember when he said that he was a royal on his mother's side, and then he pulled a shrunken head out of his pocket? Well, we all assumed that the head was that of his mother's and never really questioned the statement. So if that is the case, and Facilier's mother was royalty, and Facilier is really Tiana's father, then that would make Tiana a princess, at least by Disney standards. But that simply can't be true, otherwise the movie wouldn't be possible. The whole reason that Tiana was in the mess in the first place was because she was mistaken as a princess. And when she kisses the frog prince, instead of transforming him into a human, which is what would have happened if she really was a princess, she turned into a frog herself. Whether she knew if she was a royal or not, it wouldn't have mattered because the spirits would have known, meaning the spell would have acted accordingly, basically concluding that if Facilier was telling the truth and he is a descendant from royalty, then he definitely cannot be Tiana's father, since she was clearly not descended from royalty herself. Now, in our personal opinion, we don't believe this theory to be too accurate. There's just a lot of information that contradicts it. Plus, we think that it was Tiana's father who inspired her to follow her dreams and to work harder than anyone else around her until her dreams were made into reality. He just didn't come off as the type of person who would have ended up making a deal with the devil to save his own hide, or to even take a shortcut in life. It would be turning against everything he believed in. We like to believe that narrative that Disney led us to believe, that he died a war hero, fighting during a time of great need for the betterment of his family. He just doesn't seem to fit the build for the antagonist of the film. But that isn't to say that this wasn't a fun theory to explore. We love looking at all of the theories out there, no matter how plausible they seem to be. But be sure to let us know what you guys thought of it, and how possible you think it is for it to be true. And of course, as always, thank you for watching. Well, that's all, Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.